Ever think about the price of a dream? Not the late nights, not the constant hustle, but the cost. To you, to the people around you.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving into today, and get this. It's all through some seriously insightful stuff about, well, Steve Jobs.
Okay.
You sent over these translated Korean texts, interviews, documentary snippets. It's wild, stuff you rarely see.
Yeah, it's really something. What grabs me about these Korean sources is how they kind of flip the script on Jobs, you know?
Go tell me more.
They don't shy away from the tough parts, like was his leadership style, the sacrifices, all that. Was it really worth it?
And it kicks off with this detail that blew my mind, completely shattered my image of teenage Steve Jobs, whiz kid, tech genius, all that.
Oh.
His high school transcript, 66% average, 66. Makes you wonder, what were those years really like? How does that become the guy who revolutionizes, well, everything?
It really makes you think, right? Like maybe genius isn't this straight line, you know? Maybe those less than stellar grades, maybe they mean his mind was already somewhere else, you know? Beyond the textbooks and all that.
Almost like he was bored, destined for something bigger. And speaking of searching these sources, they dig into something that clearly shaped Jobs. Adoption. We've all heard the stories, but these texts, they hit different.
It's raw.
When he talks about his birth parents, he calls them a sperm bank.
Oh, wow.
It's heartbreaking. You know, you feel that need to prove himself, maybe to them, maybe to the world. I don't know, but it's there.
Yeah. You can feel it. Yeah, it's like that rejection. It's fuel, right? This fire to make a mark on the world. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. The sources, they show this, I don't know, like a split.
A split.
Yeah, like with close friends, he's vulnerable, honest about being given up, the pain. But then publicly, it's like he rejects that whole narrative.
It's the mask, right?
Yeah.
We all wear it, especially when the stakes get high.
Exactly. Though there's this letter to his friend, Tim Brown. It's like a crack in the armor, you know? A peek behind the curtain.
You mean the one where he talks about his trip to India?
Mm.
That's fascinating to me. Because he's young, he's already found success, but there's this searching. Like he's still looking for something more than just building the next big thing.
Exactly. And that's where India's huge. It wasn't just some youthful adventure. It's key to understanding his whole design philosophy later on.
Okay, I'm picturing it. But how does 7 months in India transform Steve Jobs, tech visionary? Help me connect the dots.
Think about it. Meditation, intuition, the sheer sensory overload of a place like India, the colors, the chaos. It's not a coincidence that Jobs, a guy obsessed with sleek design, intuitive products, found something there.
Like he tapped into a different way of thinking.
Yes, and it's not just meditation. The sources talk about his experience at this massive festival, the Kumbh Mela, millions of people united by faith. He sought the power of shared experience, of collective emotion. That becomes central to how Apple products connect with people, you know, on a deeper level.
Creating experiences, not just gadgets, which, let's be real, he didn't do alone.
Yeah.
Enter Steve Wozniak, the wizard behind the curtain.
Ah, Wozniak. The guy built the first keyboard-to-screen computer. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
A far cry from what we have today, but revolutionary. Pure genius.
So you've got Wozniak the builder, and then Jobs, who sees the magic in it. It's like he saw the future, a computer in every home, way before that was even a thing.
And he knew it wasn't just about building it, it was about selling it, making people want it, making it desirable.
Which brings us to the legendary Apple I. Can you imagine owning one today? The sources mention there's only a handful left, some in rough shape, but each one worth a fortune.
It's such a contrast to the Apple II, which is really where Jobs' vision takes off. The Apple I was for hobbyists, but Jobs wanted computers for everyone, in homes, schools, everywhere.
And that's where the Apple II's focus on gaming, on education comes in. It wasn't just a computer, it was a door to a world of possibilities.
Exactly. He wanted to capture imaginations, not just build machines. And he was willing to make bold moves to do it, like his trip to Korea in 1983.
Wait, Korea, what was he doing there?
Securing chips for Apple's future. He saw the potential of Samsung long before they were Samsung, you know.
Playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers.
Exactly. It was a decision that would change everything. For Apple, for technology. Of course, not every move was perfect. The Macintosh, as revolutionary as it was, wasn't the instant success he'd hoped for.
The Macintosh, often called his first big failure. But was it really? I mean, it gave us the graphical user interface, the mouse, the building blocks of how we use computers today.
That's true. It was ahead of its time.
Light years ahead. But it was pricey, and it had problems, glitches. But this is where you see Jobs' resilience.
These Korean sources give a really personal look at this time. They talk about him being devastated by the Macintosh's reception, but he wasn't giving up.
Like that setback just made him more determined. But sometimes that drive, it leads to clashes. And his fight with CEO John Sculley, that's a prime example.
Oh, talk about a power struggle. The sources suggest that Jobs called that board meeting to try and oust Sculley. Can you imagine?
And then he gets ousted, the ultimate blindside. Makes you wonder, though, maybe deep down he knew something had to change.
It's definitely a turning point. And it wasn't just business, it hit him hard personally. The sources even mention him breaking down in his office. This guy, known for being so tough, so in control.
Reminds you that behind everything, he was human.
Absolutely. And that exile, it forced him to look at how he did things, his leadership style. He founded NXT, which was brilliant, but it didn't have that Apple magic.
So what was missing? Was it just the market, or had Jobs himself changed?
That's where Pixar comes in. And it wasn't just a side project. It was crucial for him.
This is the studio that gives us Toy Story, a film that changed animation forever. But how did it change Steve Jobs?
Think about it. He's suddenly surrounded by these creative powerhouses, people like John Lasseter, and they challenged him to trust their instincts, to let go of some control. There's a story where he actually defers to Lasseter's judgment on a big creative decision.
Wow, that is not the Steve Jobs we're used to hearing about.
Exactly. It shows he could grow, adapt, even when faced with something totally new. Pixar let him refine his leadership, embrace collaboration, without losing sight of his vision.
And then he comes back to Apple. It's like this odyssey, trials and tribulations, and he comes out stronger.
And that's when he cements his legacy, right? These sources highlight his prediction about digital life. It seems obvious now, but back then, revolutionary.
He saw the future.
Yeah.
Technology woven into every part of our lives. And what better example than the iPod?
Groundbreaking. Suddenly, 1,000 songs in your pocket. But the marketing is what's fascinating. Not the tech specs, but the emotion. 1,000 songs in your pocket. They understood that people connect with stories, with feelings, not just gigabytes and processors.
It's the Steve Jobs magic, making tech not just functional, but something you want, something almost magical.
It is.
But we can't sugarcoat it, right? These Korean sources, they don't shy away from the tougher stuff. The reality distortion field and how it affected people.
Ah, yes, the reality distortion field. His blessing and his curse, right.
Because it got results, but at what cost?
Exactly. He could convince himself and everyone around him that impossible things were possible.
Like that story about the last-minute iPhone redesign, pushing his team to the absolute limit.
Yes. And it worked. It created these incredible products, but it also created this pressure cooker, this constant pursuit of perfection.
Oh, it was complicated, right? What's the price of innovation? Was it worth it?
It's a question with no easy answers.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, the App Store changed everything. But did he embrace it right away?
You'd think, right.
You'd think it was a given? But it wasn't, was it? You'd think, right.
It's wild. These sources say Jobs initially pushed back on the whole idea of outside apps on the iPhone.
Really? He wanted to keep things closed off.
Total control. That was Jobs, at least at first.
Do you imagine if he had no App Store, no everything? It's mind-blowing.
It really is. The iPhone would be a completely different beast.
So what happened? He just wake up one morning and have, like, an epiphany about opening things up.
It seems like that time away from Apple, plus the way tech was changing, it gave him a new perspective. He started to see beyond just making a product. He saw the potential for a platform.
And the App Store was genius, wasn't it? It's like suddenly the iPhone was more than just a phone. It was an entire world.
Exactly. And it shows that Jobs, even though he had his vision, he could adapt. He saw a good idea, even if it wasn't his initially. He knew he had to let go of some control to stay ahead.
There's a lesson in there somewhere, I think. Sometimes the smartest move is letting others shine. But as I dug into these Korean sources, there's one theme that really stuck out to me about Jobs. This belief he had in combining tech and the humanities.
Yes, his famous quote about making products that sing to our hearts, right?
Yeah. It wasn't just about making something functional. It was about emotion, storytelling, making life better.
Exactly. And these Korean sources, they get that. They understand that technology at its core, it's about connecting with something bigger.
Jobs was a master at that, wasn't he? A storyteller. He used technology to paint this picture, this vision of the future.
Those product launches, the way he unveiled them, it was like theater. He wasn't selling a gadget. He was selling an idea.
And he made us believe in it. that even with all this tech, we could still find something magical, something human.
He did.
But we can't forget there's another side of the story, right?
Right.
These Korean sources, they don't shy away from the complexities. This is a guy driven by ambition. He demanded a lot from himself, from everyone.
And he achieved incredible things. But it makes you wonder, what was the cost?
That's the question, isn't it? The reality distortion field, the never-ending push for perfection, was it the price we had to pay for all this amazing tech?
It's a tough one. There are no easy answers.
Maybe that's the point. Jobs wasn't about having all the answers right. He was about asking the right questions, about pushing the limits, about dreaming bigger.
It makes you think, what if he had been content with good enough?
Would we have the iPhone as we know it, the App Store? Would any of this exist?
Or did it take that relentless drive to change the world?
It's bigger than just tech, isn't it?
It really is.
It's about ambition, progress, what we're willing to sacrifice. It's a lot to unpack. It's a lot to unpack.
It really is. And it gets to the heart of who Jobs was, you know?
This idea of pushing, always pushing.
That relentless pursuit of his vision. It's what led to the next T-Cube, too, which, by the way, was a flop commercially.
Oh, flop.
It had this revolutionary operating system
Which becomes
that Apple ends up using.
the foundation for everything. It's incredible, those twists and turns.
It's like he couldn't help but innovate, even when it, backfired.
But that drive, it could be a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, for sure. The people who worked closely with him, they talk about the pressure, the intensity. It took its toll.
There's a story, I don't know if it's in those Korean sources or not, but about Jobs berating some poor engineer over a fraction of a millimeter on the iPhone's design.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
And the guy's like, nobody will even notice that. And Jobs apparently just stares at him and says, I will.
Classic Jobs.
It's that attention to detail, that obsession that made him who he was. But it came at a price.
It always does, right? The bigger the dream, the bigger the cost.
And that's maybe the biggest takeaway from all this, from these Korean sources, from everything we know about Steve Jobs. He was brilliant, he was flawed, he was complicated.
He changed the world, but not without leaving his mark on it and on the people around him.
So as we wrap up this deep dive on Steve Jobs, think about that. Think about the dreams you have, the price you're willing to pay, and the cost, not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. It's something to really sit with, you know?
It really is.